All right, so we are talking about the Apology of Socrates, and there I'm giving you the bird's eye overview of the Apology of Socrates, right? It's very important, at least at this point, to know that Socrates didn't write this. Again, like nearly everything we know about Socrates, it was written by Plato, who, like a faithful and loyal puppy, was right next to Socrates for many of the years, especially towards the end of his life, absorbing and taking in all the things that Socrates was sharing across Athens, right, and influencing and questioning, and we'll get into more of that. But what I'd like for you to know here is, number one, an apology, despite our contemporary understanding and connotation of it, an apology is not, in fact, indicating that you're sorry. An apology actually means a defense. So the Apology of Socrates is not a text where Socrates feels bad and is trying to right his wrongs and admit his errors, and to say that he apologizes to the people in Athens who are accusing him of several things. But really, his apology is his defense, right? And it's primarily it's kind of a combination of monologues from his perspective, right? He gets the opportunity to talk pretty much as he wants to, which is not the case in most courts of law, but this is different. And then it also consists of dialogue between himself and a few other people at his trial, primarily a person named Meletus, who is one of the primary accusers of Socrates, right? It's also important to know that his life hangs in the balance here, right? The Apology of Socrates, the defense of Socrates, is really his final words, all right? So you will find, and spoiler alert, he dies, but prior to his death, he's given the opportunity to make his own case, to respond to criticisms and accusations of the people accusing him. And then he also has the opportunity after the verdict, which comes back, it's not unanimous, but the majority finds that he should, in fact, be put to death by hemlock poisoning. And he accepts that, and he has the ability to respond after he knows he's going to die. That's going to be the first two, what are actually paragraphs, the first two paragraphs that he shares after the outcome, after knowing that he's going to be put to death. That's going to be the primary text that we focus on today during our assignment, right? But prior to then, let's kind of take a look at the big picture here. All right. It all starts when one of Socrates' oldest and closest friends visits the oracle at Delphi, right? So the oracle at Delphi is a place outside Athens which has a person, the oracle, who is chosen, selected, appointed as a mouthpiece for the gods, right? So this person, it's an actual person, right, who claims to be the kind of the go-between, the mediator of communication between the gods and humans, right? Socrates' friend asks the oracle, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? Is there anyone wiser than Socrates? Right? This person's grown up with him. They've known him for years and years and years. And so they ask this question about the wisdom of Socrates, and the oracle's response is no. There's none wiser than Socrates, right? When Socrates hears this, he's like, Okay, right? And then this is the type of person that he is. He literally makes it his life's work to disprove the gods, right? To go around to question the oracle, to question religion, to question the systems and structures and politicians, to literally question everything and everybody he can in order to narrow down the definition of wisdom so that he can prove once and for all that he is not, in fact, wise. Now, the Socratic irony here is that in doing this, in proving that he's not wise, he actually demonstrates a great deal of wisdom, right? And what we find as he questions people, he's someone who wanders around Athens. He's at this point he's a little older, but he makes his way through every community. He talks to everybody that he can, from enslaved persons to politicians to like senators, to artisans and sculptors and painters and poets and women and children. Like he literally questions everybody in every social stratus that Athens has to offer. And he comes away understanding that the higher one's position is, the more wisdom they claim to have, but the more ignorance they actually have, right? The lower the station in life, children, youth, enslaved persons, deeply impoverished persons, the poorest of the poor, lepers, outcasts, whatever, he comes to this conclusion by talking to them that they believe there's no way they can be wise because of their station in life. And he finds that it's like this paradox that what we believe makes wisdom actually creates egotism, and where we think people don't have anything to offer, they have the most to offer us, right? That we can learn more from people of lower stations. We can learn more from their experiences and their humility than we can learn from people who are popular and who we want to go to their parties and we want to rub shoulders with them and be seen with them, right? His whole idea is to turn the entire structure of the social fabric of Athens upside down, right? And to tell the senators and to tell the people, and who eventually become the people trying him here, to question the motivations, to question the wisdom of people who are simply living their life in pursuit of their own selfish ambition, right? And he finds that he cannot be wise because he admits that he knows nothing, right? But in admitting that he knows nothing, it demonstrates his wisdom, that he is open, and at least, I mean, maybe not on the surface, he doesn't see, he kind of comes off as a pretty, I don't know, I imagine hugging Socrates is probably like hugging a cactus, right? Like he seems a little rough around the edges, a little prickly, and he's not afraid at all of anyone's opinion of him, right? What he demonstrates in doing this is that he ends up gathering a following, not because he set out to do it, but because he just doesn't care to stop it, because it's not the point. Socrates goes about his life and starts making trouble for people in very powerful positions because the dude won't stop questioning everybody, right? Let me tell you something. People in authority, people with power, whether that's social power, political power, or economic power, people don't like to be questioned. They don't. The more power people have, the less open-minded they are to correction and humility. Look at modern politics, right? Look at even, I mean, you can even look at leaders in large religious sects, right? Denominations, right? When people have a lot of authority, when they have social capital and social power, they don't like being questioned. Well, that's all Socrates did. So he made a lot of enemies, right? One of the things of which he stands accused, there are other things, but they seem to be a little bit more minor in comparison here. One of the things that Socrates stands of being accused of is corrupting the youth of Athens. Now, Socrates doesn't have a school of philosophy. Socrates is basically a vagrant who walks around Athens, walks into any building, institution, meeting, organization, anybody who like walks everywhere and like questions people what they're doing, right? People, I mean, he's a total nuisance in Athens. That no one likes him, right? Except some of these younger students of his. He doesn't have a school because he doesn't even write anything down. Right? What we know about Socrates is from Plato, who followed him like everywhere for years, up to the point in the moment of his death when he records this, the Apology of Socrates. Right? All these youth and all these younger people who are following him, they're typically from well-to-do families. And they start doing what Socrates does, right? He's kind of leading by example, but he's not trying to set an example. He's just trying to figure out what wisdom is and how it fits into society when society's divided by social status and economic status. He's trying to find where wisdom exists in these areas that separate people for a number of different reasons. And so these youth, I mean, there's like these kids, teenagers, young adults just following him around, listening to what he does, how he questions people, and then they start doing it too. And their daddies, you know, like their elders, many of whom are senators, who are people in positions of power and authority, who own businesses, they're merchants, they're well-to-do, right? Their kids now seem rebellious because they're following this dude Socrates around Athens, questioning everything, right? Even their authority, right? Like many of you, I mean, some of your parents might even say, hey, we would love you to grow up to be the type of person who questions everything except for us, right? Like, don't question what we say, right? Question what other people say, right? And so now the city of Athens has a huge problem on their hands because there's kind of this uprising of critical thought. Well, why are you doing it this way? Well, why is that person, why don't they belong here? Right? And that creates trouble. And these people eventually get together and they're like, what can we do about this guy? We've got to stop this, right? So eventually they arrest him. They arrest Socrates. They put him on trial. They give him the opportunity to explain his positions and to give his own defense. They then huddle up and meet and come to some different options they have, one of which is to exile him, the other of which is to execute him, right? And they present these two options because here's the thing, like when people are questioned and when authority and power get questioned, one of the things that sometimes those people appreciate is like the guts that it takes to do that, right? Like they can recognize that it takes a lot of courage to question people in power, right? So they're like, hey, okay, we get it, but you gotta quit, right? And your two options here are you can quit and we will send you away from Athens. We will exile you from Athens, or we'll kill you. And it's no choice for Socrates. He's like, you know what, man? If you send me away, you know what's not going to change? Me doing this. If you want me to stop questioning everything, if you want me to stop seeking wisdom and knowledge in the people around me, there's no place on earth that you could send me where I would stop doing that. So it looks like you're going to have to kill me. And they're like, all right, well, okay. All right. So they go meet. They decide on this. It's not unanimous, right? Like the people who are deciding that he's going to die. It's not a unanimous vote, but it is a majority, right? It is a majority. And so, and Socrates has the grace to acknowledge that not all of them are putting him to death. And he has some very pointed and very sharp words after he's received his sentence. He's got some very, very specific things to say to the men who have condemned him to death. Right? So ultimately what we see is that if you intend to read this, or if you ever read this with the belief and like the kind of the anticipation of Socrates admitting that he was wrong and then apologizing and saying that he's sorry, you're not going to find it. Because let me tell you something, you read this dude is not sorry. He's like the opposite of sorry. He's proud. He is absolutely adamant and proud to give his defense because of how much he's dedicated his life to this idea that society has a really messed up view of what wisdom is, where it comes from, and who has it. And so all of this, I mean, that tells you a lot about this dude's personality, that he hears a prophecy about him and then attempts to spend the rest of his life up until his own execution disproving it. And the irony is that he proves it, right? That he actually demonstrates the qualities of someone who is wise. In many ways, he is a really strange, contradictory, he's like a juxtaposition of arrogance and selflessness, right? Arrogance and humility, right? He totally admits freely and demonstratingly so that he knows nothing, right? That he knows that what he has in his mind as far as knowledge and wisdom is a fraction of what exists in the universe. And he acknowledges that he will never get to that full enlightenment, right? But he also knows, because it was from him too, he also knows that because he's left the cave, right? Allegory of the cave, which we've already talked about. Because he's left the cave and he's become enlightened about wisdom, where it comes from, who holds it, and why it's important in society, and how it's kept from other people, and people are kept as prisoners of ignorance and prisoners of power and prisoners of wealth, right? When that's not divided, when that's not shared, when that's not accessible, right? He knows that it is his duty and responsibility up into his death to share what he has learned. I did say duty, right? That it is the driving force of what he does in his life, right? And like I said, he's not perfect. He made a lot of mistakes. He made a lot of enemies. There's things about him that are not pleasant to know, but we have to hold those in different hands, right? We can hold the negative stuff, we can hold the bad stuff in one hand, and we can hold and acknowledge the things that he has shared, which contain wisdom for us, even thousands of years later, that we can take and we can apply to our own lives. Yasmin, you have a hand up. What would you like to ask?
What did he say to the people who wanted to kill him? Like, he said he had specific words.
I got the audio. All right. Can you restart your question, please?
I said, what did he say to the people who wanted to kill him? He said he had specific words.
You kind of broke up there. What did he want to say to
the people who wanted to kill him? He said he had specific words.
Yeah, he does. All right, I will read those to you. Okay. So these are this is his immediate response to the people as a result of his sentence, right? So his execution. All right. So I'm going to read this. It's 2 paragraphs. We're looking at maybe about 100 words or so. And these are also the same paragraphs that you're going to look at for our assignment once I'm done with this. He says, "For the sake of a little time, men of Athens, you will get a name and be charged with the responsibility by those wishing to revile the city for having killed Socrates, a wise man. For those wishing to reproach you will assert that I am wise, even if I am not. At any rate, if you had waited a short time, this would have come about for you of its own accord. For you see that my age is already far advanced in life and close to death. I say this not to all of you, but to those who voted to condemn me to death. I say also the following to these same ones. Perhaps you suppose, men of Athens, that I've been convicted because I was at a loss for the sort of speeches that would have persuaded you if I had supposed that I should do and say anything at all to escape the penalty. Far from it. Rather, I've been convicted because I was at a loss, not, however, for speeches, but for daring and shamelessness and willingness to say the sorts of things to you that you would have been most pleased to hear. Me wailing and lamenting and doing and saying many other things unworthy of me, as I affirm, such things as you have been accustomed to hear from others. But neither did I then suppose that I should do anything unsuitable to a free man because of danger, nor do I now regret that I made my defense speech like this. I much prefer to die, having made my defense speech in this way, than to live in that way. For neither in a court case nor in a war should I or anyone else devise a way to escape death by doing anything at all. In battles, it often becomes clear that one might escape death, at least by letting go of his arms and turning around to supplicate his pursuers. And there are many other devices to escape death in each of the dangers, if one dares to do and say anything at all. But I suspect it is not hard, men, to escape death, but it is much harder to escape villainy, for it runs faster than death. And now I, since I am slow and old, and caught by the slower, that's death, while my accusers, since they are clever and sharp, are caught by the faster, by evil. And now I go away, condemned by you to pay the penalty of death, while they have been convicted by the truth of wretchedness and injustice. And I abide by my penalty, and so do they. Perhaps these things even had to be so, and I suppose there is due measure in them. All right, so he goes on, right? But essentially, I mean, that's to me a pretty sharp accusation of the character of the people who are condemning him to death, right? That he could have told them what they wanted to hear. He could have easily said the things that he needed to in order to avoid death, And yet he didn't, because to avoid death might mean that he had to become as evil and as unjust as they in order to accept living, right? I much prefer to die having made my defense speech in this way than to live in that way. I would rather die having the courage to say what I believe and to stand by it than to live as a coward who does and says what people want them to, right? So what we see here, before the middle finger existed, this was several verbal middle fingers to the people who were accusing him and who were deciding to execute them, right? Essentially, he calls them evil villains in their weakness and their injustice, right? And he's like, I've got to live with myself for what I did, and these cowards have to live with themselves for what they've done, right? And so in a way, it also kind of turns, and this is very common for Socrates to do. It's very common for him to take an accusation and then use it as a mirror to show people the truth when they criticize him. He's very, very adept at using language to blind people with their own reflection. All right, and that's exactly what he's doing here. Is that he's not going to go gentle into that good night. No. He's going to rage against the dying of the light. And he's going to make sure that these men who have accused him and condemned him to death are going to forever remember the words that he said about them and to them. All right. In a way, it almost seems as though he's giving them their own sentence. He's giving them their own penalty, right? By doing this to me, you will never escape your guilt for condemning me to death, right? And so for that reason, what we see here in the Apology of Socrates, thankfully written down by Plato, what we see is we get a new idea, or we are validated in our ideas, maybe even more so now, more so the day before one of the most contested elections in US history. What we start to see is that whether it's thousands of years ago or whether it's today, how meaningful is it for us to live lives that we are proud of despite their difficulty, right? How willing are we to accept the consequences for operating, for believing, and for acting as just people, justice-minded people, people who are pursuing what's right, what's wise, because there are often not rewards for that. Often life is harder when you decide to continually tell the truth. Many times life is made at least temporarily easier by lying, by telling people what they want to hear. Let me tell you something, relationships are a lot easier if you just tell people what you think they want to hear. But an easier relationship is not a stronger relationship, right? And I think that on the one hand, we can kind of take away from watching his defense, we can kind of take away a little bit of courage in this belief that, like, what do we owe? And we talked about this question a while back, like, what do we owe others? And what do we owe ourselves with regard to truth and justice? Do we owe everybody truth? And if we don't owe everybody truth, then how meaningful is the truth that we decide to share? When we pick and choose truth, are we hurting our integrity? Are we hurting people's ability to trust us, especially when they know that we're truthful about some things and not others? If a person is bent toward justice, are there any consistencies in the groups of people for whom they want justice? If you want justice for victims of abortion, are you also willing to seek justice for single mothers? Are you also willing to seek justice for people who deliver terminally ill children? You know, are we willing to also seek justice for people whose children were separated from them at a border because they had the belief that they could come somewhere safer than where they lived and give their children a better opportunity? Are we for justice for them? Do they deserve the truth? Right? And so what I want you to consider here, and while we can make this, the goal is not to make this political, right? The goal is to apply what we're learning in the literature to the things that are happening around us in real time, to the issues that are dividing not only our nation, but some of our families, relationships, communities. Who do we owe truth to? Who deserves justice? You know, y'all spent a lot of years reciting a Pledge of Allegiance that says, and justice for all. But we live in a system where it's really justice for some. And you're a person, and you deserve justice. So don't others? Doesn't everybody else? Understanding here the way the literature works for us, when we understand what Socrates is actually defending here, it's less about him defending himself. It's less about him even defending wisdom. It's really about him defending that he lived his life in pursuit of just and truthful ideas, and then worked to apply those and to call those out in people where he saw injustice and inequality. And up until his dying breath, he was criticizing the power structures that disenfranchised and oppressed people in his society. Like I said, he was by far not a perfect person. He supported some ideas like enslavement. However, he was also willing to hear the opinions and the beliefs of enslaved persons, and to use that to build his case so that he's not just making a case by only talking to the elites. He's making his case about truth and justice and wisdom because there's not a single community or a single stratus in their social fabric that he did not engage with. That's one thing about him, is that he didn't believe he was above anybody else, right? And that allowed him to move between these very different social structures and people among whom there were different social statuses, in order to understand better his own ideas and then shape those in a way that was influential to others. And you will find as you grow up that you will have to make difficult decisions. about relationships, about jobs, about people, about emotions, everything, right? From family to vehicles. I don't know. Like you're going to be faced with tens of thousands, if not millions of decisions throughout the course of your life. But if you can keep at the front of all of your decisions, what's the truth and where's the justice? It doesn't matter what society says. You can't go wrong with that. You can't go wrong with people, and you can't go wrong with living a life that is worthy of truth and justice.